We can't afford to pretend, I've said this often, that what Bowen is doing on energy policy is going to be anything other than the national economic suicide note that for years I have predicted it would be. It's obvious that Bowen and the Albanese government, in spite of all their travels at taxpayers' expense, don't seem to understand what's happening in the rest of the world. Politically, net zero is on the nose in many European countries. I'll be having a look at that right through tonight. This is so important. In July, the Swedish Parliament officially abandoned its 100% renewable energy target to meet net zero by 2045. The Finance Minister told the Swedish Parliament, quote, "We need more electricity production. We need a stable energy system," unquote. This is Sweden, who've got huge mountains and deep lakes, so hydroelectricity plays a key part in their renewable energy supply. They can't afford to ditch fossil fuels. Only a couple of months ago, the Telegraph newspaper in the UK reported that, quote, "Sweeping bans to cut greenhouse emissions in Europe are leading to widespread public backlash. Climate coercion is a very bad way to cut greenhouse gas emissions in Western democracies," unquote. The same UK newspaper also warned that, quote, "Germany is heading for a political meltdown." Their leader, Olaf Scholz, faces a reckoning as Germans are resisting his green leadership. And the BBC in July admitted that Britain is not capable of meeting its net zero targets, which is precisely what I've said in relation to Bowen. The Albanese government thinks it'll be a global leader on net zero and climate action. That's hubris of the worst kind. Well, in a move which the British journalist Alastair Heath has described as having the potential to, quote, "upend British politics," the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, miles behind in the polls, has declared war on the green establishment. He's talking about a gentler, more humane, sophisticated environmentalism committed to protecting consumers. Now, Peter Dutton should note the Conservatives are in political trouble in Britain, but as Alastair Heath writes, quote, "There is now clear green water between the parties, making life trickier for Sir Keir Starmer." As Alastair Heath warns, the Green Mafia in both Labor and the Conservative parties, quote, "will unleash every dirty trick in the book to force him," that's Sunak, "to back down." But one comment by Alastair Heath stands out, quote, "By any rational standard, Sunak is merely being pragmatic and realistic. Banning pure petrol cars in 6 and a bit years' time," he writes, "is a dangerously utopian policy that would guarantee chaos, mass impoverishment, power cuts and a popular revolution." Are you listening, Bowen? As Alastair Heath has written, referring to banning petrol cars and oil and gas boilers, quote, "They're all examples of what the philosopher Rob Henderson calls luxury beliefs, ideas adopted by hypocritical, jet-setting elites to highlight their high social status, even though they inflict immense cost on those who can't afford expensive electric cars or spare thousands of dollars to replace a boiler with technology that is not yet ready," unquote. Well, it gets worse. And this is amazing stuff. I've talked to Matt Canavan about this. I have to repeat. Is anyone in the coalition listening? Bowen is not, of course. There's an outfit called C40, Citizens Climate Leadership Group. This is a group of 96 cities around the world that represent a 1/12 of the world's population and a quarter of the global economy. Melbourne and Sydney are part of the C40 cities. C40 is the name given in 2006 when the number of cities reached 40. C for city and 40 cities. Now there are 96 cities, a veritable global network of mayors. It's chaired by London's Sadiq Khan. All these mayors meet and sign up to this dangerous rubbish. And this is why Clover Moore wants no one to drive cars and for everyone to be on bicycles. The latest report says, in order to save the world from climate change, you should only be allowed one return flight every 3 years. That's wherever you're going. Doesn't matter where you're going, but no more than 1,500 kilometres in total distance. And the C40 mob want this by 2030. This is what Bowen and his ilk are on about, but they won't tell us, like The Voice. One return flight of no more than 1,500 kilometres every 3 years. So this mob of mayors want all their residents to fly less, airlines to increase the proportion of sustainable aviation fuel they use, but the guts of it is this: one summer holiday for POMs every 36 months, but Londoners won't be able to go from London to Athens. That's more than 1,500 kilometres there and back. Even if the POMs wanted to go to Glasgow, they're in trouble. There and back is more than 1,500 kilometres. You see, if you kept one flight per person every 3 years, you'll cut aviation emissions, of course, because there will be no aviation industry. The airlines go broke. The foreign holiday disappears. This is the ultimate pie-in-the-sky rubbish. Can you imagine one 1,500 kilometre trip every 3 years? Is this the stuff the linos in the coalition preach? Liberals in name only? Will this apply to woke millionaires and billionaires? To the corporate elites and the politicians? I suspect not. Why not? And remember, this global network of mayors are the same mob who want to say, eat less meat and don't drive a car. Now, can someone in the Dutton-led coalition put some water between it and Labor on this destructive energy, net zero global nonsense? Take a stand. See the energy wreck coming down the track and get in now and make this sort of energy rubbish an election issue. I mean, you either stand for net zero or you don't. It will fail us. Is the coalition going to be part of the failure? And Clover Moore in Sydney and Sally Capp in Melbourne, the mayors, beware. We know what you're up to. If what I am telling you is not an economic suicide note, what is? One airline trip every 3 years. No further than 1,500 kilometres there and back. One trip, Sydney to Melbourne, every 3 years. Well, not if you want to get back, because that adds up to over 1,700 kilometres. And they want all residents of C40, 96 cities, to use airlines less frequently. Economic suicide for the airlines. Have you heard any politician raise his voice against this rubbish?